What is up, fantasy football fanatics? What is up, IDP Army, Dynasty Defenders? It's your man, Jordan Rains at 50 Shades of Drunk. Got an awesome show for you all today. Going to be talking with one of the best ball aficionados of the world. And we're just going to be talking about some players that we like. But before we get into that, if you are watching on the channel, make sure you subscribe to the podcast feed. And if you're listening on the podcast feed, make sure you're watching on the channel. You want to make sure that you get the whole gambit of what we do. But yeah, I'm not even gonna beat around the bush. I'm gonna bring him on now, my man, Michael Leone. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Appreciate everything you guys do over at Establish the Run. And I appreciate, again, taking the time to be here with me to talk best ball. I'm sure, I think, obviously you're probably in some drafts right now. You wake up every morning, you got to check in on those slows. I'm recently coming around to slow drafts, but tell us a little bit about what you do for anybody that maybe isn't familiar with you. This is my guy. I call him the source. Everything you hear in the best ball streets, the original source is probably this guy right here. So tell us a little bit about the Best Ball Manifesto, where people can find that.
Yeah, you can find it over at Establish the Run. This is going to be my fourth NFL season over at Establish the Run. I do, I'm the director of analytics over there, which sounds like fancier than it is, but kind of run like our projections and like data stuff in the back end. But then I do a lot of content, for DFS and recently Best Ball. Best Ball is growing like crazy the last few years, so we're devoting more resources to it. I love Best Ball. The strategy behind it to me is so much fun, and the ability to just draft so many teams too. Like you can't do that in a regular managed league because you just die doing waivers in season. So I wrote this Best Ball Manifesto a couple months ago, and the idea was I just wanted to do all this research from Best Ball Mania 3, get it all in like one spot, one document, and then I figure I could kind of riff off that document for the whole summer, adjust accordingly to the
Mm-hmm.
different nuances we're seeing for Best Ball Mania 4.
Excellent, excellent. So what were, I've read it. It's like I said before I talk, open it up. It's thick. It's a thick document, y'all. It's not something you open and you're just like, oh, it's not one of those 3-minute reads, those 4-minute reads if you're sliding through LinkedIn. This thing's going to take probably 30 minutes to get through, and it's probably going to take a little longer than that to really digest because it is put into some meaningful segments. You break it up by stacking, how that affected people, ADP value, how that affected people depending on when they drafted. There was roster construction. You even looked a little bit into the fast and the slow drafts. So what are your, let's just go ahead and say what was the biggest takeaway for you? Because I know last summer, the crazy best ball summer, everything seemed to be about stacking, but then it also kind of later seemed to pick up this conversation about week 17
Mm-hmm.
stacking and correlation. And I've seen some arguments go back and forth on Twitter about this whole concept, this
Yeah.
idea. What are, distill that for us?
Yeah. So I wanted to look at it closely because you're right. It became a huge talking point last year. And the reason why it's a huge talking point, if you're playing in Best Ball Mania, the prize pool is heavily slanted towards week 17. And in particular, it's like really top heavy in week 17. So um, as a result, there's kind of two school of thoughts. There's one school of thought, which is, the playoff structure in Underdog Best Ball Mania is completely random. Like you don't have much control over what happens there. So just try and advance as many teams as possible to playoff stages and then run pure. The other
Mm-hmm.
school of thought is like, hey, like our expected value is heavily tied into what happens week 17. So like maybe we should be building our teams to take advantage of that and think of it more of like a week 1 week DFS contest for week 17 and just hope that
Mm-hmm.
some of these really heavily playoff optimized teams are able to make it through. I kind of land somewhere in the middle, but I really wanted to try and tease out like what's actual signal and what's noise as far as that conversation goes. And it's been hard to do because we, historically we just don't have many contests like this. And the playoff weeks
Mm-hmm.
themselves, you've got week 15, 16, 17. It's a really small sample. Anything you try and tease out is going to be at the mercy of just what individual players happen to do that week.
Mm-hmm.
So what I tried to do to kind of tease out the value of stacking was looked at each week 1 through 17 last year, took all the playoffs from playoff teams from Best Ball Mania 3 and pretended any single one of those weeks could have been a playoff week, to just see, like, based on the structure of these teams, what gives them the upside they need in a given week to finish top, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 16, or in the case of the finals, 1 out of like 470 or whatever it was. And definitely found that stacking mattered a ton. So there's definitely merit to week 17 game stacking. The more quarterbacks you have stacked, the better in terms of same team pass catchers. And then if you can add opponent bringbacks to that to get a full game stack, it definitely increases your odds, because it's less things you have to get right. You take advantage of the correlation. We might not know exactly what's going to happen week 17, but we know who's playing who, and we know those players are positively correlated with one another.
Exactly. And again, like if you go with the player takes, you kind of open yourself up to some of these later round picks, so here, this one says Tua, Jalen Waddle, a lot of people probably had those kind of stacks, thought, but then you get where you really get those differentiators or those late guys, Tyquan Thornton. Okay. And you only really got there because you were, viewing that game a certain way. I ended up doing that a lot, kind of by accident, with KJ Osborne last season. I don't remember exactly what week it was towards the end there, but I know I had a lot of Kirk Cousins and a lot of KJ Osborne, which was dirt, free. It was free, and you could only get Justin Jefferson so many spots. So I had a lot of him on teams, and I'm doing the same thing this year because I haven't checked out that actual game. I'm kind of like you. I'm a little less inclined to be excited about week 17, and I'm a little bit more. I like to think of the team overall and say, what kind of team structure sets up to, even if it's not a great game, they are going to be by default throwing a lot, scoring a lot, maybe because their defense is crap, maybe because their offense just moves a lot. That's one of the reasons I kind of avoid Baltimore in general, just the number of plays, kind of being a little lower, play style being a little slower, etc. But what is, I have you here, what is the week 17 matchup of 2023? Like, what's the one people are really focusing on, and maybe where can we pivot?
I think the one people are really focusing on is Kansas City, Cincinnati. I mean, that's the one people really want. That's definitely shaping the ADPs up top a little bit, between Kelsey, Mahomes getting pushed up, and then T. Higgins in that group. So that's the one people are keyed in on because it's two high-powered offenses. It's likely going to be a really high-scoring game. For me, I'm not keyed in on anything. Like, I view the draft as super dynamic. Kind of what you're saying, like as you draft players, you start to make assumptions about those teams, to things that need to go right for that team to work out, and then you add in the correlation like on that. So like I'll stack any of the games, just based on how my team sort of is unfolding. But that game's definitely got the most hype.
Okay. Let's get into what I love, which is player takes. Because I watch football. You're an analytics guy. I love analytics too, but I always say, there's qualitative and quantitative. You know what I mean? And you to do the qualitative stuff, you have to watch it. You know what I mean? You have to kind of get there yourself based on what you've digested with the quantitative stuff. And so that's kind of where I come to that game. I'm interested that so many people are going out of their way to take Travis Kelce so high, but I can get Kadarius Toney in the 5th, 6th, 7th round sometimes pretty regularly. And I feel like his upside as a micro player take is completely unacknowledged. And it reminds me of Tyreek Hill, who before he was, the bee's knees, it was a similar situation, unacknowledged upside. And maybe, but the Chiefs never have a wide receiver one, and Alex Smith is meh. But it's like, well, but also Andy Reid kind of, knows what he's doing, and he handpicked Tyreek Hill. So there are these qualitative factors that you can pull out and say, but this is, I feel like that's where we're at with Kadarius Toney. I think it's funny, again, micro player takes. I saw something huge this smart, tweet about Jahan Dotson. He had like 7 touchdowns on 35 receptions. He's a, potential top 20 candidate. People love riding his D. But, Kadarius Toney basically did the same thing. I mean, you already have 5, 6, 7 touchdowns on like 2-3 dozen touches, but like we can't gas him up. So it's just interesting that, in my head, having our conversation, I've got Kadarius Toney on like almost every single one of my best ball teams right now, because if he hits, I've got him on, you know what I mean? Like I've just got so much, and it was dirt cheap. It's drifting up. So what do you think about that? Finding player takes inside of these larger takes and sort of planting your flag in them.
Yeah, no, I think it's super important. Like a lot of this stuff I do does seem like more macro strategy based, but I certainly have my specific player takes, and I kind of try and like interweave them with the macro stuff. And I know Adam Levitan had established a run, like he's all about, taking advantage of the player takes, especially if you're on different platforms that aren't as sharp. Like you can really get ahead of the field on player takes. So player takes and like just takes on offenses in general. So for me, the Chargers this year is the team that I'm really excited about, have a ton of Chargers exposure. They bring over Kellen Moore. I think they're going to run that like a super fast pace. I mean, they already ran a ton of plays per game last year with Kellen Moore. That could even be higher. They're going to throw a ton. And just if you can unlock some of the efficiency from Herbert, he had kind of a boring low ADOT last year. Wasn't as successful down the field. If you can kind of combine the efficiency with the volume, like that offense could go nuclear. So there's absolutely room for interweaving, the individual player takes.
Yeah. I call that, I'm always just like making up stuff, but I call it burn bias. You know what I mean? Like it's where there was always going to be the next Kareem Hunt until we got burned so many times, we just stopped talking about it. Now it's like Pacheco could, but nobody wants to do that. And it's like, well, just take Pacheco and McKinnon, and theoretically, you've kind of got the next Kareem Hunt. It was dirt cheap. Same thing. Everybody was so high on Justin Herbert last year. Everybody's been so high on Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts was a second and third round pick last year. His situation has arguably gotten better, and you can get him multiple rounds later now. You know what I mean? It's burn bias. It's like, well, I was so in. I'm suppressing the value. I inflated the value. Now I'm suppressing it. So like, I love the Chargers call out there because all those guys, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler still has super high value, but Justin Herbert, much more higher cost to get them on your teams last year, and I didn't have them hardly anywhere. I had a handful of Mike Williams, but now this year I'm gonna say all that I still am kind of avoiding them. I feel like they're a little bit, especially their wide receivers, they're still a little pricey for their variability. There's no one who's really that guy. They all can have moments. So I just usually, if I take somebody, it's like Josh Palmer. You know what I mean? I'm just like, we'll get the 1 or 2 games he does.
Yeah, I like the burn bias though. That's definitely a thing. I'm with like Kyle Pitts is another one of the guys that I'm pretty on heavily this year. In 6th, 7th round. It's just I think people have overdone it. Like a season can only play out in one way, but that doesn't mean it was like predestined to play out that way. And just the way Marcus Mariota handled that offense and whatnot, just a lot of the downside things all hit at the same time. It's gonna be better for Kyle Pitts. 1,000-yard season as a rookie tight end, still has, kind of insane profile upside.
Yeah. He hasn't even caught any touchdowns. He's caught 1 touchdown. Like he has so much positive regression. If we really want to get into it, his value should be going up. So here's the concept I have. That's the inverse of that is what's happening with Travis Kelce. Whereas 2 years ago, you could get him in the 3rd round. This last year, you get him in the 2nd round. Now the risk is higher. He's older. Things are changing around him. But his cost is the highest it's ever been. He's basically, you can't really go higher than Travis Kelce's gone. I mean, at some point you have to go down, but now he costs the most. It's the opposite of the burn bias. It's like, well, I have to take Travis Kelce in the 1st round, or like, it's dumb not taking him. I'm like, no, like all the value to taking Travis Kelce the last 2 years was the fact that you got him later because people didn't want to believe. Now you're overpaying and you're set up to get hurt, in my opinion. So I haven't taken Travis Kelce at all. I'm a Chiefs fan. I love the Chiefs. I have literal zero. And I saw Mason Dodd tweet this out the other too. And he's a sharp. He said he has 0 Travis Kelce this year. And that guy drafts 3 or 4 times a day.
I don't have 0, but I'm probably underweight. We have him ranked a little bit behind the market, and it's tough. But what you're saying is correct, where I think the last few years people are like, oh, it's a tight end that's getting a little bit older and they're a little conservative, and he just keeps paying off and keeps paying off. And now people are like, well, he keeps paying off, so I don't care about the age. But it's actually the age risk is getting higher and higher. So those situations to me are always the toughest though, where you have like this systemic age risk, like older tight end, but the production's been there and the setup looks amazing because you're playing with like the best quarterback ever. And on the team that's going to throw no matter what. And
you're right.
There's not much serious target competition. So he's a tricky one.
He is so tricky. He's slippery on the field and in best ball. All right, so I want to segue that into another conversation, which is, and I'll take this off the screen. I don't know why I pulled this up. What are your So I have this kind of issue because I don't know, I'm a weirdo. I think about the fact that the best ball, the rates, the advancement say, 2 to 3 tight ends is kind of optimal, right? So I step back and say most people slash everyone is going to be drafting in that 2 to 3 tight end range anyway. So wouldn't that kind of be a I don't defeated metric to look at for advancement rates? Wouldn't you really want to look at that position more from an outlier perspective? Since most people are already, most teams that are going to advance are probably already going to have 2 or 3 tight ends by default because most people are going to draft in the structure that you're putting out there. That's the reality too. Most people are drafting in these sort of set structures. So is there something to be said about going out of your way to sort of create these different teams? So, and I say that, and I go by saying all that, say I've been drafting a lot of one tight end teams. I know it's dangerous. I know it's fragile, but my thought process is this. If I get one extra player on my roster or two that are able to put up a 17 or 18 point game, like a KJ Osborne, kind of out of nowhere, is that 3 or 4 or 5 extra points that they're going to have over their usual going to be enough to kind of float the fact that my tight end is only going to put up what every other tight end puts up? And it kind of, I don't know, in my head, I can kind of see it like almost as an algebra problem where it's like, I feel like if I can catch lightning in a bottle or give myself 2 more extra shots at that, what's the difference between another 2 or 3 points from a different tight end? Like if Edgar Ingram gives me 6 this week, and then Dallas Goedert gives me 9, and then oh God, my third tight end gives me 11. I mean, okay, so I get 11 points instead of 6, but I'm giving up a player that might get 24 that week, get 2 random touchdowns. You know what I'm saying? Do
Yeah.
you kind of see what I'm saying there? And so my question is, and so because I'm not, I'm a qualitative guy. I'm just drafting a bunch of one tight end teams and I'm seeing what happens. Like that's literally kind of where I'm at. And I'm going in on my player takes. I'm balls deep on David Njoku and Deshaun Watson. They've both been floating up, but I've just been consistently getting them all off season because I think that there's something here. Now if he gets hurt, so be it. But then I'm just like, so what? I lose 10 points that week, but I've put another player on my team who might give me just as many points to kind of replace that. I even started thinking, what if you don't even draft tight end at all? But I think to actually have your team go through, you have to hit the roster limit. So you have to have at least one. But what are your thoughts on kind of these extreme sort of outlier idea, like a concept like that, especially for a one-off position like tight end in particular?
Yeah. I mean, first off, I love people experimenting with different builds and stuff. Like, as you said, some of we don't have data on some of this stuff because people aren't willing to try it. So we don't necessarily know if it's good or not. So I like that. The one tight end stuff, I see some merit to it if you're playing like drafters style, where it's like weeks 1 through 17, like total points.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it for like Best Ball Mania with the way the playoff structure works for a few reasons. One, like anytime one of these tight ends has had these, one of these huge seasons, generally the advance rates are good if you only take one, which is in your favor, but they're like just as good if you take two. And so my thought process is kind of like you're taking on some extra risk for sure without necessarily getting in, all that extra reward. It is great to have that extra roster spot for a guy to like maybe bank, a huge upside week, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes at the other positions you reach like a diminishing point of returns where, you've got, do I need an eighth or ninth wide receiver? So the other thing is like in Best Ball Mania, the way the playoffs work, like let's say Njoku goes nuts, right? And you have all this single Njoku tight end teams. He's going to be super heavily owned come the playoffs, right? Because he had such a great year. What you needed to happen happened. And that was great for your teams because you got them all there. But now you got like a high owned player in the playoffs that you need to do well. And there's no way for you to get unique at tight ends if like he has a bad week or just some other tight end pops off because and I care about that more in Best Ball Mania specifically because having like some uniqueness matters. Where if you take Kelsey, sometimes I even go the opposite way. You take Kelsey, if you take a couple of tight ends later, you might end up with this combination that hits in the playoffs that nobody else has because everyone who drafted Kelsey only took one tight end, for example. But I do think if you're looking at the regular season prize for Best Ball Mania 1 through 14, that's where I think just going with one tight end has a bit more upside where like you think that David Njoku has like the nut season that he needs to have, and then you've got you're super robust at all the other positions. That's where I do think you get some upside in terms of season long points scored. I just don't like it with the way the playoff weeks work.
Yeah. Well, my thought process there too, with it being Njoku, is like you said, he doesn't even have to really have the nut season. He'll
Mhm.
kind of maybe edge you in. And I wouldn't even say that a lot of people would have him. A lot of teams that maybe did get Njoku, again, they probably have 2 or 3 other tight ends. So my teams are going to be
That's fair.
structured by default much different than every other team that has him. You're giving yourself one extra chip at a position, then no one else has it. No matter which one it is. Is it that third or fourth quarterback, if you want to get wild? Is it that Zach Moss, which I got a ton of Zach Moss on teams, because it's kind of like he's totally free. No one's drafting Zach Moss right now. I'm like, week 17, Jonathan Taylor loves to get a little banged up. Who knows what's going to happen? And now I can just do that because I have one tight end, and it's just a freebie. You know what I mean? And that's a way to get totally unique. So then I know that the Njoku teams are kind of by default going to be totally unique builds. So I don't know. It's just, again, something I've been experimenting with. And I kind of do that just because, like I said, I've read the manifesto, and it's kind of, I hear guys, talk about their favorite builds, the strategy, and, what's optimal to advance and all this. And I'm always just like, okay, but if everybody starts doing it, you kind of have to start
Yeah, it's hard to
being.
know, like, yeah, where to get unique. Sometimes it's hard to get like super unique, like with just structurally though. Like it comes down to like players, but I'd rather like I'll get weird at say, once in a while, if I get 3 or 4 really good running back values in the first, 8 rounds, like I'll stop at 3 or 4 running backs. And I think that I like that a little bit better because you still are covered for, bye weeks. Guy gets hurt a little bit. You
Mhm.
can still cover that. But ultimately, like with Njoku, you're kind of just making this bet that, okay, I took the right running backs. They stay healthy. If they stay healthy, my team's probably going to advance because, I have extra roster spots to play with. All these other teams are taking like 6 running backs. I've only got
Yeah.
3 or 4. I can
Yeah.
draft 10 wide receivers. I can draft, 3 to 4 tight ends. I can
Yep.
draft 3 quarterbacks. So I do like to mess around with the builds. The onesie position's hard for my math brain to get past the
I
like yielding the bye week points and like
Yeah, big old
is
zero. But the thing is,
yeah.
my thing is, as a consumer during the season, I go and I don't max enter. Like, I'm not that deep in it. Like, I
Yeah.
hand draft all my shit. You know what I mean? Like, I'm every team I kind of know a little bit about or remember, oh, I fell asleep in this one, or some of them like, oh, this one's trash. Actually, I looked at a team the other day that I labeled trash 2 months ago, and I was like, dear God, this team's amazing. So it's just like, it's crazy how like things can change so quickly in
For
our
sure.
perspective. But I like to, really get in there and make those decisions on my teams. And I don't know where I was really going to
Yeah.
go with
Generally
that.
where I get weird too is I like to get a ton of ADP value. I know a lot of people draft like a little, and I still integrate my player takes, but I'm probably more lukewarm, a little bit boring sometimes with
Agnostic
the
about who's
draft.
getting you the score.
Yeah, somewhat agnostic. That's a good way to put it. But within that though, sometimes you end up on some weird builds just because you're like, oh, I'm gonna take this really good value. It doesn't seem like it fits. Structurally, this wouldn't make sense normally, but I'm going to build around that, knowing that like I'm going to have the best version of this team. So I just had a team where I took Mark Andrews round 3 and George Kittle fell like a full round past ADP. And I'm not even like really in on Kittle this year, but I was like, I'm going to take him here. I
Hmm.
kind of, part of me wishes that I got that Kittle value in another draft where I didn't have a tight end yet, but
Yeah,
at the same time, that's going to be a unique combination, Andrews and Kittle. And I didn't give up, some wide receiver value
that you
as much
loved.
as other teams would because he fell around past ADP. I got him in the 7th round basically, and I still got those 5th, 6th round wide receivers in those rounds where other people are taking Kittle. So that's sort of where I'll end up weird. It's like I'm not necessarily going into a draft saying like I'm going to do double elite tight end, but if it slips and I get the value on it, yeah, I'll mess around and kind of change what I had intended to do.
I agree. One of the things I noticed last year, and I've noticed when I go into my pools and look, kind of like what you said with these short bench running back teams, I saw quite a few teams in my pools that advanced with me, and some of those I did or didn't advance ahead of me, that had teams where it was like the player takes really carried them. Like they had, like, I remember one team had like 4 running backs, and only 3 of them scored points. So that means his fourth running back never scored more than the 3 he picked before. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So he just nailed those picks, and he had wide receivers, like his bottom 2 or 3 wide receivers, they never came off his bench. So sometimes that's kind of where I look at teams like that, where I'm like, if you really, the teams that win are the teams that really end up nailing the player kind of narratives. The Saquons, just take him. It's going to work out kind of. George Kittle last year. Oh, kind of the same thing happening this year too. It's like, he's never been as cheap as he is right now. You know what I mean? And that 2 or 3 years ago, he was ahead of Travis Kelce in Dynasty. I remember getting in arguments with guys about that. And they were like, oh, George Kittle's so young and amazing. And now it's like people just completely forget. It's just like, again, the game we play is so hot and cold. Luke, people, they hold these takes so tightly for like 6 months. And then it's bloop, and they're just gone. They don't care anymore. It's just totally different. So I don't have nearly enough George Kittle. I mean, you bringing it up sounds like a synchronicity to me. I need to start adding him into the one tight end strategy, because David Njoku, like you said, we get one grain of salt in the computer chip, or that perfect little body of his, and we got a lot of zeros out there. And nobody's coming in to save me.
Nope.
Yeah.
I got to get you on off this one tight end kick. Try it on some of your teams. It seems like you're going all in on it, man.
It's not all in. It is all in my puppy too. I think I only did like a 10 or 12 of those, but I think 8 or 9 of them are all just David Njoku by himself. And I'm like, let's just see what happens. I mean, let's just rip it. So we'll see what's up. I don't mind.
Would be, I think, if you wanted a modified version of that, is in like so this time, maybe so this time of year, especially around 16, 17, 18, the running back, wide receivers, like, we're taking guesses, right? Like, a lot of these guys can be zeros, but some of the tight ends that are going that late are like, we know they're going to be starting tight ends. So if you play like the 2 tight end with Njoku and take like a super cheap Ty Conklin, super cheap, Gesicki or Hunter Henry, then maybe, you still get the upside of, you didn't devote much capital at all into the tight end position. If Njoku carries you, that's great. But, you cover yourself at least.
But if my team advances next year, when you do Best Ball Manifesto 5, all these teams are going to go into the 2-3 tight end pool, and this is all going to be for naught. So we'll
create a 2 tight end pool where you only drafted David Njoku and a 16th round. This 18th round second.
Like I said, I'm interested. I want to see how many of these teams and how far they go. I mean, I think it's gonna be fun. I'm crazy. 3 years ago, same year that I was talking up Travis Kelce and everybody was on George Kittle, I was a huge fan of flexing a tight end. I remember I had a season where I played Travis Kelce, and I had like Austin Hooper that year that he went crazy. So I flexed him like every week. And I was like, oh God, I was like, if you hit on your second tight end, just flex him, screw, a third wide receiver and all this. I tried it the next year with Dallas Goedert, and my teams just didn't work.
Yeah.
So I kind of gave up on the 3 tight end strategy. But that wasn't best ball either. So maybe it works in best ball. I don't know. But like I said, I'm always down to like try crazy things. And that's partially because just from my fantasy football journey, like, I'll never forget you never forget your losses. Like, I had this one, it's an anecdotal story. I've told on this channel a couple times, but I'm gonna tell it again. One of my first leagues I was ever in was playing with some guys from softball. It was like 2016, 17. And the guy, the drunkest, the loudest, the dumbest, the most fun of the group, he's in the draft, and we're all still a live draft because this is 5-6 years ago. We still did that. We were still communing with each other, and we're in the draft. I shit you not. And I mean, we all know better. Everyone in the room knows better but him. In round like 4, 5, 6, he took 3 tight ends. And this is a regular redraft thing. He took like Delaney Walker. He took like somebody from like Denver, because he's a Denver fan. And he took some other ridiculous, terrible tight end. Like, it was the dumbest thing ever. He won the league. Okay. He won the league. And we were all like, it's tilting. But it's also humbling and a reminder that, like, no matter how cool I feel like I am, how smart I feel like I am, how stupid I feel like he is, this game is it's not random, but it doesn't necessarily always make sense. Yeah. I mean, he wasted 3 picks right in the middle of an early draft on tight ends. None of them were even like top 12 tight ends that season. I think Delaney Walker might have been like top 8, and he won the league. And I always take that into every draft with me. Like, the guy, it doesn't matter. It's just do your best, have fun, and you don't really know what's going to happen. So I've always kind of I've been willing to take shots since I saw that.
Yeah, no, I did a pod a couple weeks ago, and like, you can't be afraid to look stupid, right? Like you got to push the envelope a little bit. You want to be a little bit uncomfortable to kind of try things and get unique. And like at the end of the day, it's just fantasy football, you know. It's like not a big deal. But I think a lot of people are too afraid to kind of look dumb, like they want a crutch to lean on, whether it's like, you know, even the research I've done, like it says what happened last year, and it's not saying what's going to happen the next year, but people want to kind of tick the boxes exactly what I said. And it's like the point is to try and really understand what happened last year. And so that way we know why it happened. It's not to repeat that, you know,
Mhm.
verbatim the next year.
History is informative. That's what I always tell people. It's not, indicative of what's going to happen. And it's something that gets lost, like you said, in a game where it's two sides of the same coin, quantitative, qualitative. And it's very easy to crutch yourself on the quantitative stuff because in 51% of realities, you're right, right? So, you can't, I can't argue with you. I can't argue with that. Even if you were wrong in this one, you can kind of fall back into that. So that's why I always say like I'm more of a consumer first because doing the fantasy football talk, it's all conjecture, it's all projections. But when you get out there on the field and line them up, I'm like, look, let's do your guys versus my guys. I don't care about what you say. Like, can you beat
Yeah.
me this week? It's like Michael Scott and when he runs past the sign and the car goes by him and it goes like 20, 35 miles an hour. And the Oscar Escobar's like, beat it, beat it. They're like, you weren't running that fast. It's like, screw you. I don't care if you had the best team ever. I won. You can't beat it.
Yeah.
Another anecdotal story, just quickly. I remember my first year playing fantasy. I had Martavis Bryant. Some jackass in my league had Antonio Brown that week, and we were going head to head. He was like, "Oh, I'm gonna beat your ass," blah blah blah, and I was like, and I moved Martavis Bryant up, so they went head to head. Bryant beat him, and again, that's one of those moments in fantasy. I was like, all right, like trust your gut, trust your guys. You know what I mean? Like just because a guy at the end of the season might have everything checked off, like a Michael Pittman or a Chris Olave, doesn't mean they got that dog in them like a AJ Brown does, or maybe a CD Lamb who hasn't put up all the right numbers just yet. So I always keep those variables in mind. All right, well, let's talk about some of you have an hour, right? I don't want to push you past you.
Yeah,
I didn't really
I'm
say.
good. I got like an
So
hour, but then I got to jump. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Okay,
So they're
I want
like
to talk a
11.
little. Want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the different contests on Underdog because I would listen to you and what's his name?
Herzig.
Yes, the other day you guys were talking about the different formats. This is something I didn't really pay attention to enough, I don't think. And it's honestly it's the payout and advancement structures. It's like some of these tournaments, even though they have a little bit higher buy-in, they're where you want to be playing, I think, because you're going to go a little bit further by default. It's a little higher barrier of entry, but like the payouts will start out a little smaller. But it's like I would much rather advance 4. I have a 1/3 chance of going. And I feel like against the field, I have more than a 50-50 chance against anybody in fantasy. So like I saw that and I was like, whoa, like I need to be in more Bulldogs, more Dalmatians, because I'd been kind of hanging out in these puppies, these lower end drafts. What are your kind of thoughts about the variety of drafts that and we'll just stick to Underdog right now for the purpose of this conversation. What do you think about
Yeah.
like the variety of contests that they have and are offering? What do you kind of think about Best Ball Mania 4 or 5? Are we on
4? We're on 4.
4? What do you think about that just in general? Because I have some kind of thoughts just in a general sense. I kind of want to I'll riff in a little bit, but what are your thoughts on the platform, how they're doing that, payout structures, etc.? As a
Yeah, I mean,
consumer, not as somebody that's maybe people that aren't subscribed to Establish the Run that listen to us, though. Maybe they're only doing 40, 50 drafts a year.
right.
What would you sell those people?
So first of all, I like that they're introducing a lot more variability in the contest. Last year, they basically had Best Ball Mania and then the puppies, which the puppy was just kind of a smaller version of Best Ball Mania, kind of super large field tournament. You can draft a bunch of teams. You've got a shot at like a pretty big grand prize relative to what you put in, but like it's pretty unlikely you're actually gonna win that prize. So to me, I say this when I do DFS content in season 2, you kind of want to know what your advantages and weaknesses are, like as far as what draft makes most sense for your skill set. But more than that, like just like entertainment wise, like what you'd prefer to do. Part of the reason I started playing small field DFS tournaments was I wanted to, if you play like a 200 person DFS tournament or 100 person size, like over the course of 17 weeks, you're going to have a couple weeks where you've got a chance. You're not necessarily going to win, but you're going to have that sweat. And it's the same thing for best ball. If you enter some of these contests where you said like 4 out of 12 advance out of the first round of the regular season. But then even after that, some of them are like 3 out of 8 advance or 2 out of 8 advance, 2 out of 8 advance. And then you're in like a 40-person field for the finals. You know, you're not going to win $3 million like you could win in Best Ball Mania 4, but
Yeah.
You might have a realistic chance at winning like 20K or something, which
Yeah,
is
you're
still,
competing.
you're
Again, that's kind of
competing, right?
the consumer. That's the thing. It's like I feel like all that's why so many men play this, because it's like it's a way to, I hate the saying, but live vicariously. It's like, okay, like I'm not a head coach. I can't put this whole team together. I can't put together a practice. I don't have the funding. But guess what? I can download this app. I can pick out the guys who I think are good, and then I can have them play other guys, and I can still like be Belichick of my couch or whatever it may be. Like you said, that sweat, that moment, that feeling. I mean, that's what we're chasing, is a feeling, right? It's a dopamine hit, call it.
And like, if you don't like, if you think the week 17 stuff is stupid and like doing the correlation, you probably want to play something that's not as super top heavy in the playoffs, right? Because you're going to be hurt if other people are stacking week 17 and you're not. But if you're playing, like they just announced a new tournament called the Chihuahua. I think it's a $4 entry. So, and they have all the stakes too, so now we're starting to see some of the structures that you mentioned in the higher stakes stuff make their way to lower stakes, which is nice. But even this has, you can turn into a pretty good chunk of change, but it's a lot flatter price structure, so you don't need
I noticed that
to have as much emphasis on the playoff stuff. So there are all things to consider. I just love that they're trying new things and there's more variability, because it was a little stale to me last year to just have Best Ball Mania and the Puppy, which again was basically just a version of Best Ball Mania. I love Best Ball Mania. It's fun, but it's a weighted lottery, right? Like, you can put the odds in your favor a little bit, but you're essentially still playing a lottery.
Yep. Essentially, you kind of have to get in that max enter mindset too. I feel like for something like that, and at $25K or $25 an entry, it's like, again, for a consumer, I pull it down to something a little more scalable for me personally. So I've kind of just been taking my shots there, and like you said, the payout structure is so top heavy. I'm just like, I would be more inclined to put that money into some of these other tournaments that are a little bit smaller field, maybe where I know some of the people, and it's also fun, just like you said, to watch the leaderboards. Some of these guys, especially if you've been on Underdog 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, some of these names, some of these guys that you're competing against. So it's a little, it also adds an element there, of fun and like rivalry or whatever you want to call it. So I've been getting into some of those smaller, entry, 3 to 5 entry, higher stakes ones, just because I think that I'll have a little bit better shot of getting some returns on those personally this year. And just based on the payout structures too, I was like, okay, this seems like it makes a little bit more sense.
And if you nail your player takes, like, we went back to the one tight end thing, right? Some of that is tough in Best Ball Mania because of the way the playoff weeks work, where like you need this weird combination of like uniqueness and you need a good team. Whereas, if you just nail that one tight end strategy and the advance rate is, 2 out of 8 or 2 out of 6 or whatever it is, now you don't need kind of some of those random things to take advantage of the playoff weeks as much. Like, just having the best team matters a little bit more than having like this correlated setup. So
bingo. I've been thinking about that more too. Just like getting back to just drafting like I want to win. Just drafting the best guys there are, instead of being like, oh, well, theory dictates that this is the best. And I'm just like, back up, brother. Like,
let me do my thing.
Yeah. Like, okay. It's like, so who do you want to take? Like, who do you want to take right here? All right. Well, then I kind of reconcile those other things instead of being like, what does reality tell me I should do? Which is why I have so much Kenneth Walker too. It's kind of obscene, but he's by Josh Jacobs this year. And I was heavy on Josh Jacobs. I think I had Josh Jacobs on like 40 some odd % of my teams last year.
Oh, wow.
I took him and Devin Singletary. I mean, he and Devin Singletary, I just took every time. And like, it was like, if one of these guys hits at this ADP, it's a wrap. And one of them hit, and it was and the other, Singletary still did way outperformed his ADP. I think he was going off the board as like a running back 3 by the end of it. Same with Antonio Gibson. Sometimes it's just like, who's going to be good this year? Okay. Yeah. Like, and then I'll just figure out the rest of the stuff later. You know what I mean? It's just about
Walker, not to get too micro, but Walker is probably my highest owned of like the early running backs.
So boy. See, and he's not early. He's like, you can get well, here's my thing. On my board, I have him round 5, but this board is 2 weeks old. I took him at 401 yesterday because it's like that now, because people are catching up. You know what I mean? The Cabernet, or I can't even say his name right now. It's Cabernet, whatever. He's
Charts.
irrelevant. He's the new Zamir White. He's just a guy. They just need to know someone else in the backfield. And I'm sure he'll have his part to play. You know what I'm saying? That's fine. And how I handle, another micro take, how I handle Pacheco is I just draft Pacheco in the 5th or 6th or 7th. Sometimes, well, you could get him in the 8th back in the day. And then just take McKinnon in like the 12th, 13th, 11th, whatever it is. Then it doesn't matter who has the week. You get both of them. You know what I mean? And sometimes I think, again, it's like, don't big brain yourself. Why would I take some shitty running back in the 11th round who might be amazing when I could just take the one who, when Pacheco's not amazing, he's going to be amazing? You know what I mean? Like in my head, it's like, it's not, we overcomplicate it. It's like, well, I want to take him, take Clyde Edwards-Helaire too at the end. I mean, just lock it up, figure it out.
So Deneric Prince makes the team and just messes with your whole strategy.
Well, we'll see how it goes. But I mean, you know what I'm saying there, though? It's one of those things where it's like, we're reconciling different kinds. Dynasty. Okay, well, I need a handcuff. Well, it's not technically a handcuff in best ball. It's just a guy who might be a starter in week 16. All on my Zach Moss take. I mean, the dude caught like 40. I think he caught like 40 passes. He had like 90 touches last year. You know what I mean? Like, and he missed like 7 games. Like he played 0 games because the Bills were like, we don't want you anymore. Like you just sit. But he was still fantasy relevant. He had like a 100-yard rushing game last year, like week 16, 17. He's completely free. What do we know about Jonathan Taylor? He gets a lot of touches. Well, he also had an ankle injury. So it's just like some things I'm just like, why not just take them both? You know what I mean? Like if you're in that spot, instead of taking Corey Davis, which I do take a lot of Corey Davis, just take Zach Moss instead. You know what I mean? Just lock up that maybe 11, 12-point game that you might desperately need in week 16. So I like the micro takes. I think sometimes we get into, again, that's why I say on a consumer level, because I don't have a massive bankroll, and people who do, they're probably already established the run and look at stuff like that. But, when you back out and you look at the consumer and the competitor, I want my guys, I want to, it's like betting on your horses, I want to have a stable of dudes who rock. So, and I say all that, and I'm sitting here and all I can think about is I need to start drafting more Cabernet to back up my Kenneth Walker takes.
Yeah, I'm torn on the handcuffing. Like you said, it's not necessarily a handcuff. I do like it in like a Walker, Charm situation where they each have their role. So, Walker's not going to be as involved in the passing game, but he's your home run hitter. He's going to get the majority of the carries. Charbonnet is going to get a bit more work in the pass game. So depending on the game script each week, like either one of them could be viable. And then, like you said, if one of them goes down, the other's going to be in a really good spot. So if I'm going to do it, I kind of want dual role. Where I'm careful with it is if I'm just like, you got to be right that you have the depth chart right. Like I don't like to mess with it as much if I don't know if I have the depth, because like the worst thing you can do is draft the handcuff and then not even have the right guy.
Yeah, the right one. Yeah. Well, that's why these player takes. I mean, I play with conviction. Go heavy. I mean, don't draft Zamir White. Don't draft Kenyon Drake. some of these guys I'm just like, I'm not buying in. But the guys I buy in on, Jamal Williams, he worked out for me last year too, quite a bit of spots. I know what Jamal, and players are who they are. After a while, you can tell who a guy is. He'll show you who he is, and the coach will show you how they use their players. So I feel like sometimes we overcomplicate it as analysts, saying, well, this might happen or that might happen or, whatever. DeAndre Swift, a perfect example. He's probably never been as valuable, in my opinion, or set up to succeed as much as he is right now. And for whatever reason, the burn bias, how long has he been a top 3 dynasty running back? How many years did it take for people? Now he's trash. He's basically in the flex. People are drafting him as a flex player, because they've been burned, because the talent didn't actually, follow through. He's in a spot now where the guy behind him is Rashad Penny. I mean, we know how that. I mean, again, players show you who they are. We know what's going to happen with him. DeAndre Swift, we know who he is, and we know at his very best, he can be one of the best. Now he's on a team that's not the Detroit Lions. Like, this isn't complicated, but here we are, So I think finding the player takes. I'm kind of like Adam Levitan in that mindset where it's just like, that's why I'm here, because I play football. I like football, and if I can find a guy that somebody else thinks is not good or isn't going to make them some money, well, if I can make some money and be right, why not?
Best of both worlds.
Literally. Yes. All right, let's see. I don't really, this has been a good conversation. Like I said, I didn't really have a whole lot of things that I wanted to focus in on. I would just recommend everybody go check out your Best Ball Manifesto. You've updated it this year. It is thick. You can go back and check out the one from last year. I did a thing a couple of weeks ago where I took every section of it and I threw it into Chat GPT and I had it distill it down for me and say, okay, like what is the main takeaway of this? What's the main takeaway of this? But for whatever reason, I was trying to log into my Chat GPT on this to open it up and maybe pull it up. But it was it's on the fritz. But I mean, that's, you do a good job at the very end of all these. You have these kind of summarizations. So if you do want to do a TLDR, those are available. But another thing you talked about was kind of the ADP closing lines. I just want to briefly talk about that because we are kind of we're in a moment, I wouldn't say flux, but we're in the thick of it right now. You know what I mean? It's June 21st. Shout out to the summer solstice, but we're there. You know what I mean? Like it's not a theoretical thing anymore. We're living in this sort of ADP movement moment. Like I said, like I got Kenneth Walker on this list in the 5th round confidently, and I know now if I rewrote this list, he's up around. That's where you take him now. So the things are changing. Closing ADP values are changing. Kind of give us a TLDR on that and how you address it and reconcile it.
Yeah, so in some ways, it's a good way to like measure your player takes, especially if you're drafting early. If you like DeAndre Swift, you think that come training camp, there's gonna be a bunch of buzz on Swift. He's gonna go from like the 7th, 8th round to the 5th round. You take a bunch of them now. Your closing line value essentially is what you drafted the player at. So let's say you take Swift at pick 80. His ADP come September 1st is like pick 50. You've got 30 rounds of closing line ADP value. And you can kind of see on the chart that you have up that as you get more and more ADP value, like if your team's total ADP value is like one of the top 10% best teams, you increase your advance rate in the regular season by like 50%, which is pretty massive to be able to do that.
Big. So that's big.
So this is where I think you kind of see the combination of player takes, but also kind of being smart as to when you draft guys. And the idea is to kind of like get the best of both worlds. Like you get the guys you want, but you want to be aware of the prices you're taking them at. And if you can nail both those things, you can put yourself in a position where you're just at a really big advantage over the other teams.
That's so smart. And so let's distill it down. Who are some players that you think are going to who are valuable now that are going to lose some of that value going forward? Again, Kenneth Walker is a perfect example to me. He's already floating up. I'm noticing it. Maybe you're noticing it as well. Deshaun Watson, another player I've noticed, has floated up a lot in the last 3 weeks, just in some of the drafts I've been doing. Because I was regularly getting him sometimes in the 8th, 9th round, and now he's on the board. I put an arrow. He's a 7th round target now, and even in the 6th round, I'm paying attention to who has quarterbacks, what's happening around me in these drafts, if I still want him. But I'm at that point now to where it's like, okay, do I continue to target him? And I think he still is a great value in the 6th round. But what kind of teams am I building around him now versus the teams I was building 2 and 3 weeks ago? So who are some players that you think maybe haven't seen some moves up that we can still build around right now?
Yeah, there's a few guys that I like right now, but I think Mike Evans could move up a little bit. A lot of people are on kind of like the younger, trendier wide receivers, but a lot of consistency. And we still saw the single week upside from Evans in the playoffs last year. So he's kind of, given how rich wide receiver ADPs are on Underdog, I think he could come up a little bit as some of these other like hype guys come down.
I want to touch on that because I literally was looking at I have so much Mike Evans too, and I have a take on that. I was looking at Baker Mayfield's numbers. The dude's thrown like 25 plus touchdowns like multiple seasons. Okay, his yardage is pretty bad, but I looked at his touchdown percentage rate. His career touchdown percentage, if you take away his last season with the Rams and Carolina, is 4.8. That's higher than average touchdown rate, okay? So then I went and looked at Tom Brady's touchdown rate, who his career and over the last couple of years, because he's been the Bucs guy, 5.2 across his career. That's not a big difference, okay? Now what do we have? We have a lesser quarterback who's going to focus in on who he thinks is good because that's what Baker does. He's on an offense that's probably going to throw more than he's ever thrown in his career. We have a defense going through flux. I don't know what's up with Shaq Barrett. I know JPP's gone. Sue's gone. Vita Vea is getting older, et cetera, et cetera. Mike Evans at wide receiver 35 with a quarterback who has nothing to lose, who has almost a 5% touchdown rate. I mean, and we know he's going to beat out Kyle Trask. This isn't complicated. It's not fucking calculus, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Evans, the idea that Mike Evans would go backwards makes zero sense to me. I mean, I don't see how he doesn't stay almost exactly where he's been the last couple of seasons and definitely go higher than he went last year, just based on the things around him. And that's a micro player take. How did I get there? I didn't look at anybody's yards per route run. I didn't look at anybody's passing. You know I just looked at basic stuff. Who's the quarterback? What's he done in his career? What do we know? Again, who is Mike Evans? If a guy hasn't, someone said show you who they are in 10 years, it's Mike Evans. Okay, like at wide receiver 35, he's free money. I'm putting him and Kadarius Toney on so many teams as my wide receivers 4 and 5. It's obscene. It's obscene. And like you said, his ADP is going to go up, especially if Chris Godwin tweaks something. He's one of these guys, the value is going, people are going to catch on. It wasn't trendy the last few months, but people are going to be like, oh shit. Like, and the guys he's drafted around, it becomes so glaringly obvious that he's the guy to pick there too. It's like, oh, I want Michael Pittman or I want Mike Evans. Well, this isn't calculus.
Yeah. Another guy I like, kind of like similar range, but now that the rookie wide receiver ADPs have cooled off, I like Jordan Addison a decent bit. If it becomes clear in training camp that he beats out KJ Osborne as like the wide receiver 2 and 2 wide receiver sets, his ADP is going to go up. I mean, we had a situation where we had Adam Thielen for years kind of being like a 5th, 6th round pick in fantasy. If you get, and Minnesota is so concentrated. Like, obviously, you've got Hawkinson and Justin Jefferson there. The take isn't that he's going to beat those guys. The take is that those guys are going to provide enough coverage for him to be pretty efficient, and he can still run a ton of routes because he's not going to be competing with those guys for routes. He's competing with Osborne and the other wide receiver depth. So if he's a day one starter, pretty close to it, you could still get a ton of closing line ADP value on him.
I love that take too. And the Vikings are a team, again, where they throw a lot, I mean, it's just the targets will funnel to him. He could be George Pickens with an actual like meaningful target share. You know what I'm saying? So I love that take too. And if like you said, he's going to go up, it's cooled down, but I think people are going to start to realize again, like, oh, like Adam Thielen's gone. And it's not like I've seen people kind of throw Adam Thielen out there as like, he was not anything, like even throughout some of his entire career there. But I'm like, this guy was there with Stephon Diggs, and he was better than Stephon Diggs when he was there. He played with Justin Jefferson. I'm sure that Justin Jefferson, has learned a few things from him. He didn't end up where he is and, have the career he's had by not being a good wide receiver. The last few years, I know he's had some injuries, etc. And obviously when you're playing next to God, Justin Jefferson, you're not going to look great, even if you are pretty dang good. Who's the guy who used to be on Good Morning Football? It's kind of like that syndrome. What was his name? You know who I'm talking about. Oh my gosh, I feel bad now.
Yeah, I'm blanking too.
But I mean, like him playing next to Randy Moss, it's just like, I bet, like I'm still here and I know I'm good, but I seed, I seed the goat. So I'm actually kind of interested in, well, I would say I would be interested in Adam Thielen if he landed on literally any team but the one he landed on. So RIP to a legend. All right. Well, I don't really have too much else to kind of dive into. Is there any other player takes? Is there anything else that you want to, push people to, or is there any other just something you want to get off your chest? Maybe this is a safe place. We're not going to ridicule you for having a take that's not plus EV necessarily.
I don't think I have anything too spicy. Just in general, like these drafts are dynamic, so like you got to think your way through them. You're not every draft is going to be the same. So I do think like you want to have these hot player takes, but you kind of got to work through your roster as it develops, because sometimes you're going to need different positions at different points during the draft. And if you're in Best Ball Mania 4, you're going to have to take into account the correlation. So just like be as flexible as possible without being dumb, I guess. Gotta find that middle ground.
No one tight ends. Let me take the hit first, y'all, and I'll circle back on this in a year and we'll see how these teams do. But like I said, I don't have anything else really to say. I don't want to use up too much more of your time. Appreciate you coming on, Mr. Leone. Fantasy Football Fanatics, IDP Army, Dynasty Defenders, the whole squad. Appreciate you all. Make sure you thumbs up the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you're listening to the podcast feed. And we do have merch. If y'all want to get yourself a possum shirt, go down in the, I think there's a little bar underneath this video on YouTube. You should be able to get one there. They're pretty cool. So that is it from me, from the IDP Army. I'm going to go ahead and roll this outro, and we will be back next time. I have a dynasty. We're having an IDP show soon, y'all. I think we're going to be talking about the defensive units for AFC and NFC, kind of ranking them, talking through them. So be back with that later this week. So I appreciate your time, Mr. Leone. Adios.
Thanks for having me.